I'm trying to figure out how to best ask the question. In the film, they talked about how the schools were built by the people, for the people, and that the educators were black and that they were invested in those children. And there was a connection there. Do you think that that was lost in the transition, that spirit of expectation for the students? I don't know, I'm trying to ask the question this way, but there was a spirit there, a relationship there that kind of motivated the kids to want to be the best and get the best out of the education.
I think that you're right. There was a lot that was lost. One of the things that was peculiar about black schools is that teachers were particularly nurturing, and teachers cared very, very much about whether students succeeded or not. In my own research, an example was Alonzo Hamilton in Stanton at Booker T High School. And he was the basketball coach, and what he used to do in the mornings was he would go into the principal's office to see whether any of his basketball players were absent. And if somebody was absent, he would get on the telephone. What's wrong? Why aren't you at school? Oh, Coach, I didn't feel like coming this morning. Well, you take your shower because I'm going to be at your house in 15 minutes to pick you up. That is pretty much the way black teachers, in my experience, operated as well. I think that sort of thing is lost. I think that I wish every teacher was like that, whether they be white or black. So I do think that people who went through the transition see real positive things about the black schools that they think we lost. And indeed, I think they're right.
I think also I'll add just a bit. One of the things that I talked to a few of my classmates was that when I started first grade, I had 8 people in my class. I know them all by name today. And we stayed together all the way through 6th grade. And then we integrated. And there were more classes. And so then we were separated. So we lost that connectivity. The school that was built with the Rosenwald funds was much bigger than the previous schools that we had. The school prior to that was a 1-room with an addition the size of maybe a single-wide trailer. If you can picture that size. That was the size that 67 students were being taught in. And so you go from that to a 4-room building. From that to a brick high school where all the white kids are going with the new books. And so you just kind of automatically assume that it's going to be better. So I think in some cases we kind of set back because it had to be better because each time we moved to a different place it was better. So I think that and the separation of not having that connectivity with the different students and losing that connectivity with the parents as well.
There's one thing I would add quickly, and that is that during the days when Virginia was trying to keep from desegregating, the days from 1954 to 1965, and in some cases 1970, there was a process going on that a lot of people don't know about, is that they were trying to equalize black and white schools for the first time to make them equal, thinking that somehow if they did this, the courts wouldn't force them to integrate. And so what my experience in research is that they started spending a lot more money on the black schools before integration actually occurred. And so the buildings and the equipment and that kind of thing was pretty much up to snuff, so that all of the teachers that I interviewed in 4 counties said that they didn't see a difference in the equipment whatsoever. So the transition is not so extraordinary when you think about leaving a school that's well equipped and going to another school that's well equipped. Now I realize that in some locales there were black schools that were not well equipped, but there was a movement toward equalizing the black and white schools prior to the actual desegregation.
I've got the mic here. I'll talk about the experience from the other side of the aisle. I was at K Collins Middle School when the schools were integrated, and I would have been in the 7th grade when it was announced that that was going to take place. And during that 7th grade year, there was one student brought over to K Collins from Rosenwald and put in each class that I attended. And I often thought how difficult that was for that one student to be the vanguard of that whole process. And I guess it was to get us, the white kids, used to having an African American student in class with us. But when I moved on to the 8th grade is when we, was fully integrated. And I thought it was a fairly easy process. There were some conflicts. But since then, this is not so much a question as much as an observation, because they asked the question about the transition. I made a lot of friends, in the African American community, from school and work, because I work with a couple of high school jobs. But I've had conversations with some of my African American friends since then that came over from that transition, and they seemed to impart a comfort that they had at Rosenwald that they did not have for the rest of their school years, being thrown into that situation. And I like what you said about your parents telling you were there to learn, but you were there not just to learn, you were there as vanguards of what was going to be a new America, in essence. So it's interesting. One of those people I've had a conversation with is actually here tonight. I wish they would make comment about their experience coming over to K Collins from Rosenwald.
If someone is driving a red Prius parked along the side of the road, we have another car that cannot get out.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Lauren Bellamy, and I was one of the students that made that transition with the Rosenwald School here to K Collins Junior High in the 7th grade. I didn't get your name. Oh, Yancy? Okay. Within that transition, fortunately, we were prepared by our instructors at Rosenwald. Mr. Benjamin Woodson, who was my instructor, was just here a few minutes ago. I think he's gone. However, the transition wasn't very difficult for us because we were taught by him to do your very best. You're transcending to another school, and we expect you to do your best. So that was from the family. I also went to church with him, so that was a part of the directive. But fortunately enough, he's correct. When we went there was one student in every class. You never saw another class. Like, I think Gregory Fuller was the only one that shared a class with me when I went to K Collins. But it was really interesting that they had us positioned in different classes, I guess, for us to learn how to get along with one another. But the educational system turned out very well. I was challenged by a lot of people at that time to do my very best, and as a result of that, it was able to help me within my career. Someone else?
Good afternoon. I too was from Rosenwald and transitioned over to Waynesboro actually, and it wasn't very, very difficult. Like you said, our parents and our churches were definitely instrumental in having us to be strong in what we have to do as far as education. but at the same time, the difference of the separation from schools and being together. I hear children today in Waynesboro High School have difficulty being the only black child in that class. That's today. And they never had a Rosenwald. And for them to still feel that there is a problem with them being in a school where they're the only black child in their class, that takes away from all the comfort that we grew up with, and then we had to be strong to go into Waynesboro High School. So I don't feel that our children today, in some manner, have it even better than what we had when we transitioned from Rosenwald to Waynesboro High School. That fear is still among our children, that they have to deal with situations where they feel uncomfortable. They feel uncomfortable right today, 2018, to be in a classroom and they're the only ones in that classroom. Now, I'm not saying all children, but for a child to tell me that was really, really something to think about.
I don't need a mic, but I like to say that just for the Rosenwald, we had one of the best Rosenwald schools out there.
Well, okay, maybe. They're the best elementary
But yeah,
in Rockingham County.
I was in high school, 12th grade, so, and I finished up in the 9th, started Waynesboro High School in the 10th, but my school was awesome, my teachers were awesome, and I'm just proud to have been one of the students.
By the way, there were 367 Rosenwald schools in the state of Virginia alone. So you might have a real argument if you had a room full of people from other Rosenwald schools.
What I'm saying, a lot of them were elementary, I'm talking all the way through high school.
There were two built in Rockingham County. One was a smaller building that eventually closed and was torn down when they built 33, the highway going through. And then, of course, the one in East Upton is still standing. Say that again?
I don't know.
Most of them didn't take the name Rosenwald. The Rosenwald School in Waynesboro is unique in that it is still known. In fact, when trying to get funding for a project, collecting oral history here and calling the Alice Rosenwald Fund and asking them to look up the Rosenwald School in Waynesboro, they said it can't be a school named Rosenwald because, as Professor Delaney said, Rosenwald wasn't the type to name buildings after himself. Somehow that name seemed to stick here. Actually, however, in the very beginning in the 1920s, it was listed as basic school. So somehow the Rosenwald name evolved, right, and got attached to this school, and it's still Rosenwald Community Center.
And I'll say that for the Newtown School, it was not called Rosenwald. But because it is becoming popular and people are now learning about it, people are now beginning to call it, oh, that's the East Elton Rosenwald School. And so those of us that went there kind of have issue with that. So we're trying to tell the history as it is, not as we want it to be. And so it was called the East Elton School, it was called the Newtown School, and some folks want to call it the East Elton Rosenwald School. And because he didn't want that kind of publicity, it never had that. We always knew it was a Rosenwald school, that it received funds, but it never had the name on any of the documentation that I can find.
Well, ours do, and I find it.
Okay, well, absolutely, you're on the side of the building, which is great.
Yeah.
And then you wanted
It's a
that.
beautiful school.
Exactly, but if I came in and started writing an article and I called it something other than Rosenwald School, you may have a slight issue with that.
I don't remember when it was basic, I don't think it was. I mean, I might have been born, but I don't.
I think we had a question here in the front.
My question is also about the transition. What happened to the teachers?
That is a sad story, but one of the things that I can say is that when I did research here in Augusta County a long time ago with the help of William Perry, he told me that all of the teachers here were placed after integration. That did not happen every place. In Lexington, for instance, most of the teachers became very frightened, and roughly half of them fled and found other jobs before the next school year started, because the word was out that usually the black teachers lost their jobs when desegregation came. I recently heard somebody in a public meeting in Lexington say they didn't place out teachers. Well, that is not altogether true, because I know at least half a dozen of them that were placed and worked there until they retired. On the other hand, there weren't but 14 of them anyway. So when you can name 6 who stayed, and you know some that fled for fear that they would lose their job, you can't have a blanket statement that they weren't placed, but it was a great fear that on the part of the teachers that they would not be placed.
Would you talk a little bit, please, about the support of the family and the community for the school? I don't mean in raising funds, but as you were going to school, I think you mentioned it, that.
Yes, it was, the community was very involved. First of all, most of us could walk to school. There were a couple of areas where we bused in from some of the hollers, if you will. And so there were always events held at the school. We had 2 churches. We had a Baptist church and a Methodist church. The Baptist church met on the 1st and 3rd Sunday, and the Methodist church on the 2nd and 4th. So we went back and forth the whole month. At church. And then, because we were already worshiping together, the school was an easy one. And so there would always be activities at the school. I think that one time we had a womanless fashion show where they raised funds for the school. It was not uncommon to be disciplined by anyone in the neighborhood. It was not uncommon if you did something in school that was not correct. When you went to church, one of the cooks that was there would be there to remind you that they knew what you did. And so it was, you couldn't escape doing anything. And it was just, we all knew each other and we all knew each other's family. And so it was easy to just come together. There were lawn parties and just all kinds of activities that supported us in the school and then, of course, us in the community.
One thing to remember is that most black people were poor, which meant that both parents had to work. And it was not uncommon for black parents to say to their children, I don't have time to come over to your school to straighten out the mess you got into, so you better behave yourself while you're there. And so when I was coming up, your parents' word was gospel, and you dared not to violate it. And so that was the way things worked, and you knew the teachers were going to tell on you if you gave trouble anyway. So, and the teachers were perceived as a kind of royalty that the parents looked up to, and the parents supported the teachers because they thought the teachers were royalty. And so it was a completely different thing than we experience with parenting and children today. And sort of a great thing to remember as we sort of reminisce about growing up at schools like this.
We have one last question up in the balcony.
Yeah, my question is, where and when do you think the change happened that we don't see the community being as active in schooling as they used to be? And a follow-up to that is, how do you think we can get back to that? Because I really think that that's a huge thing, especially Waynesboro specifically, and the work, and just American in general. Need.
Well, I think now, there are so many competition for our students for other things besides education. Now, my undergrad is in phys ed, so I'm all about the sports. But as I tell the kids that will listen to me, anybody can be a dumb athlete. So, and I take on that role of ownership of any of the children that I see.
Right.
And I think a lot of people are afraid to do that. I think you don't want to hurt a feeling. When it happened, I don't know. I can't speak to that. I have no children, so that's probably one of the reasons. But I've always been actively involved in any of the children that come my way, either through church or community organizations, and they kind of understand that with me. But then I grew up in a Rosenwald school where I knew I had to listen to everybody. And I think for us, we're going to have to start doing it. We're just going to have to get involved, question, and look side-eyed at folks that we have to. And if we're known as the crazy person, that's okay. If it keeps you from doing wrong, then I'll just be the crazy person today.
Can I ask you,
Please.
your little cell phone?
Thank you.
Let me say briefly that there's a reason why our school was named Rosenwald, with all due respect to the other schools, because we were the best one. Next, would all the former students of Rosenwald please stand? And on behalf of my brother and sister and Wesley Perry, I want to thank all of you for coming.